Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm Tyrone Marshall, hosting today from a glorious sunny day in Manchester. Beautiful weather over here, and talking of places that look pretty good when the sun shines, I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst in Los Angeles, wearing what looks like his own clothes for this podcast.
Yes, I am. Yes. The bag finally arrived on Friday evening, and I got my suitcase on Saturday. So yes, yeah. I had to raid Zara for a few days, but that tied me over. So if there's some free advertising for Zara, then I can recommend it in the case of an emergency.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to know you've been reunited with your Nike t-shirts and your Nike shorts and your Nike socks for the tour, and not forgetting your Nike trainers, of
Like
course.
trainers as well. Yes, yeah.
Um, so yeah, just like I say, Samuel joining us from LA. We will go into the friendly defeat to Arsenal in the second half of this podcast, but first of all, we'll pick over a few news bits from tour and what's been going on. And to start with, I guess a story that broke UK time this morning, Samuel, is United's plans for Old Trafford, or a new Old Trafford, as Sir Jim Ratcliffe has wanted for quite a while, and it seems that they are pushing ahead with that desire to build a new stadium.
Indeed, I mean that this is the benefit of going on pre-season tours. You saw stories, and you saw some pretty good stories, and that one so far is probably the best on this tour. Even though we've been fortunate to speak to a few of the players, but essentially it's kind of gearing towards what Ratcliffe wants. I think we'd have been surprised at United had we discovered that United want to just redevelop Old Trafford. I don't think that's ever been the preferred way of going about having a better stadium. And of course, there is that large footprint at Old Trafford. The club do own other parts of land as well, so that will factor into it, no doubt. But as it stands, by the end of the year, their aim is to finalise a proposal for a new stadium with a capacity of up to 100,000. Clearly, they want it to be the biggest stadium in Britain, which it would be if it was to get to 100,000. It would trump Wembley, which is 90,000. I think the stadium would cost roughly £2 billion, which has been the ballpark figure discussed for quite some time. United have done an awful lot of work in terms of research. I mean, they've come out here, of course, to LA, and they played at the SoFi Stadium, and that really is otherworldly. Having been there on Saturday for the game, and then some of us were invited there on Sunday to meet the mayor of Inglewood. The stadium is, of course, based in Inglewood, and just to get some additional background on the stadium. But that's a complete park. That is, I think it's called Hollywood Park, and there's an arena nearby where, say, there's a boxing fight or a UFC fight, you can go there, and it's kind of like a virtual reality immersive experience. You're watching it essentially. It's like a souped up version of going to Box Park, in that you'd go. You've not got a ticket to the fight or what have you, but you go to an arena, and because it's this immersive virtual reality experience, it gives the illusion that you're actually sat ringside. So this complex out here in LA, in Inglewood, I think cost $5.5 billion. That was completely financed by the Arsenal co-chairman Stan Kroenke, because of course the LA Rams, the NFL team he owns, they also play at the SoFi Stadium. But it is an extraordinary. I mean, as I said, it's otherworldly. It does look like you're approaching a massive spaceship that's just parked itself on Earth when you get there. And of course, United have been visiting some really impressive stadia in recent years on pre-season tours. Of course, we were at the MCG a couple of years ago, which is a much more historic sports venue, but still extremely impressive. Like probably the mecca of cricket. As wonderful as Lords is, the MCG is something like it must be nearly probably 4 times the size of Lords, which is pretty staggering when you consider they both host test match events. And United have been to some other impressive stadiums, like the Optus Stadium in Perth, even the Snapdragon Stadium in San Diego, which of course we were at last year. It's small, it's intimate, but the facilities are tremendous. And obviously United are factoring all this in. I remember when I did a piece last year on just some of the plans they were discussing regarding a new Old Trafford or redeveloping it. and one of them was to have one tier just for hospitality, which is kind of like Wembley. The second tier at Wembley, it's I think you're paying. You're getting bang for your buck in terms of most of them, to varying degrees, are hospitality seats. And United want a stadium that is going to safeguard their future, and they think that 100,000 is a really good round number for it, and they have absolutely no doubt that they would sell it out every week as well, because of the amount of people on the season ticket waiting list. One of the issues regarding the redevelopment, if they were to redevelop Old Trafford, was that it would actually take longer, and the cost would. I mean, there've been conflicting suggestions from people I've spoken to about it, but someone said that it would be a similar cost. Someone said it would be slightly less. But when you factor in the time it would take, because you'd have to do it gradually, stand by stand, there are logistical issues with that as well. Of course, the railway line, which is just, I don't think it's even used by punters these days, has been an issue for a number of years. So they would obviously bypass that if they were to build a new stadium. And if you can build a new stadium that is going to be built quicker rather than taking an eternity to do the new stadium. And the other issue with if United were to redevelop it, and I think we would say were to have redeveloped it in the past tense, because it's just not going to happen, is that you'd have to do it at reduced capacity. And so how would you go about deciding 10,000 or 20,000 season ticket holders who don't get in to watch games? It would be a tricky process to go through. I know, of course, Liverpool expanded their main stand about 8 years ago, I think it was, and of course the Anfield Road end that had a second tier put on it. But it seemed like I think with Liverpool, and that's what they have done with it anyway. I think it would have been a real shame had Liverpool moved from Anfield, because that is Liverpool Football Club. The same way that Old Trafford, that there's no chance that United are ever going to move away from the postcode M16. And of course, Ratcliffe has spoken about these grand plans to possibly link the Trafford Wharfside project with Media City, just over the River Irwell, which of course is where the BBC studio is. You've got the ITV studio, Granada studio is just around the corner as well, which is where Coronation Street is filmed. So if you can have it as this like lively hub where people actually go to for nights out, and where it creates more jobs, there is a lot of potential there. And also, as people would have discovered from watching the Arsenal game in early May, when United lost 1-0 at home at Old Trafford, Sir Keir Starmer was in attendance for that. So Jim Ratcliffe was there. There have been conversations already. At that time, I think everybody knew that Sir Keir Starmer was effectively the Prime Minister-elect. He is now the Prime Minister of the UK. So Ratcliffe, I mean, he got a lot of stick. Not a lot. He got some stick that day for not attending the Women's FA Cup final at Wembley. But what's the bigger priority, going to that, or is it, feeling out the Prime Minister-elect to see what support the government would be prepared to dedicate for a new 100,000 stadium at Old Trafford? And of course, the Labour Party, they have northern roots, that they feel like a northern party as well. I think it's safe to say, the fact that it's keep the red flag flying high and all that. It's an opportunity for it's an open goal for Starmer. It's clearly what United want. The interesting thing from what we understood yesterday was that when United had canvassed the opinion of 30,000 season ticket holders as to whether they'd want a new build or a redeveloped stadium, and they said it was quite even. It was roughly 50-50. But ultimately, what Ratcliffe wants, Ratcliffe usually gets. And that they are also mindful that they don't want to just make it this alien being, the new stadium. They want it to feel Mancunian, and Ratcliffe has spoken about Trafford Park's links to the Industrial Revolution, and so they would want to incorporate that into it. I mean, the amount of kit launches where they talk about, this symbolises the River Irwell, this symbolises the train tracks, this symbolises something or other, like all this guff that they come out with. It would be good for them to have something meaningful about the stadium, and they've spoken even about the brickwork and things like that. So I think fans can be pretty optimistic of maybe not having actual sketches or drawings of what a new stadium would look like by the end of the year, but certainly a very thorough breakdown as to what United want from a new stadium. And also, I don't think it would take too long to build. I think from the conversations and getting the planning permission, speaking to the council, going to meetings, council meetings, and gauging the views of local residents and what have you, it could be done within a 6-year period.
Yeah, it's another signal of the ambition of Ineos, isn't it? We've talked quite a bit about the changes on the football structure and the things Ratcliffe is putting in place to try and improve the team and win trophies, but you can't really control that beyond getting what he calls the best in class, which he's now got. It still doesn't guarantee you anything. It's a sport at the end of the day. It's not solely about having the best people. Sometimes the best teams don't always win. What he can control is the investment into the infrastructure, the redevelopment of the infrastructure. We're seeing 50 million going into Carrington. This is another example of what Ratcliffe wants this football club to be about, and also making up for lost time. I mean, Old Trafford, I think it reached 75,000 in 2006. For 18 years, it's had nothing but the odd lick of paint, really. And it's 18 years ago, it was the best club stadium in the country. Now it's probably not in the top three in terms of facilities. And it's been a long time coming, hasn't it, really? And it is another signal of intent and statement of intent from Ratcliffe.
It was an open goal for him going into taking that minority stake in United, in that it's certainly for best part of 10 years you've gone and you thought, oh, that doesn't look quite right, or that could do with improving, and then it's just the issues have snowballed, and then you've seen waterfalls gushing down various roofs in the ground. There used to be a little trickle of water whenever there was rain in the Sir Bobby Charlton stand onto the desks in the press box. Certainly that press room, it has improved. I think it had a makeover in March 2019, I think it was, and we were all very impressed by it. But it's a tiny press room for Old Trafford, and one of the great things about the SoFi Stadium is that the pitch is actually below sea level, in that when you enter the stadium, you're on the 6th level, believe it or not, and there are 8 levels to it. So they've built down into the ground there, which is pretty unique. And one of the things about American sports, as we've noticed, I mean, we went to a baseball game in San Diego last year, is that if you want to go and get a drink, there tends to be, wherever you go to get a drink or get a hot dog, you can still see what's going on. You can still, I think it's quite a communal culture out here and going to American sports games, that you go off somewhere and you can stand with friends, just rather than going back to your seat straight away, and you're conversing with others, sometimes conversing with strangers. And that's what the SoFi offers, and that wherever you go, it feels like you've got a view of the pitch, what's going on. And some people will leave their seat and they'll be gone from their seat for half an hour, maybe longer. It doesn't mean that they're not watching the game. It's just that they actually they kind of like being in the concourse area. Whereas, of course, at the majority of stadiums in England, if you want to go for a pint or a pie, you're going onto a concourse, and the only way you're going to find out what's going on the pitch is looking at the TV. So there are so many opportunities United have in terms of creating a state-of-the-art stadium. And the only con I would say with it, and a season ticket holder friend mentioned this when we were discussing it a few months ago, because he's in favour of a redevelopment, and he said the problem that new stadiums have is that within a couple of years' time they feel dated.
Yeah.
And as terrific as the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is, and it still is, and it's the best stadium in England, but going to the SoFi Stadium, I felt, my God, Spurs' stadium feels like it's dated already, because this new thing has come along within 5 years. And well, not even that. I think the stadium technically opened in 2020. Because of the pandemic, it was a little bit longer until fans were allowed in. But technically, it's a stadium that only opened a year after the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium did. And frankly, it knocks it out of the park. And I know out in America, they do things differently. And I mean that as a huge compliment, because when they invest in stadium infrastructure, it really does feel like the best in the world. And I thought the MetLife Stadium in New Jersey was terrific last year when we went there for the Arsenal game. But this is a different level to it. This SoFi Stadium, and United are sufficiently impressed that it sounds like they will be coming back to LA next year. And of course, a year from now, we'll be a year away from the 2026 World Cup in America. So these these territories, they really, really want to sell their stadiums. And the interesting thing about the SoFi Stadium, of course, is that it will also host events at the Olympics in 2028 because the games come to LA. I think the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony are both due to be at the SoFi Stadium. And uniquely, they said that the swimming is going to be there as well. And you looked at yesterday, and looking down at it, you feel like actually this does work as being a swimming arena as well. But they say it won't be too difficult to just essentially put a swimming pool slap bang in the middle of this arena that, yes, on Saturday hosted a soccer game and has hosted Taylor Swift concerts, Beyonce concerts. The mad thing about the SoFi Stadium, I suppose, is that seating wise, it is smaller than Old Trafford. It holds 70,000. It's a 70,000 all-seater stadium. It has the capacity for 100,000 with standing areas. So for concerts, of course, people like to be in the standing area as well. But technically, it's actually a smaller stadium than Old Trafford. So it just goes to show that if you get the logistics right, if you've got, if it's architecturally sound and looks wonderful enough, it can actually overshadow the fact that it's not as big a stadium as it looks, and it looks ginormous, but technically it's smaller than Old Trafford.
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting times around the stadium. The other news recently is transfers, and Manchester United looking set to sign a former Ajax player that played under Erik ten Hag in a surprise twist. Mazroui, the Bayern Munich right back, you did the story the other day, Samuel, that it looks like a deal with West Ham has fallen through, and United might be his destination now. But something of a transfer triangle, I guess, with Aaron Wan-Bissaka involved as well.
Yeah, and I think that most people would have agreed going into the transfer window that United needed a new right back, and it was prudent to sell Wan-Bissaka because he's out of contract next year. You've got to try and obtain a fee for him. I don't think there was any sense in giving him a new contract. I mean, Mazroui might turn out to be a poorer right back than Wan-Bissaka, but I think essentially they're doing the right thing in trying to get rid of Wan-Bissaka and getting a new right back in. Of course, that right back has played for Ajax and has played for Ten Hag, and I think that does undermine it in that they've got a new sports director, they've got a new technical director, they've got Sir Dave Brailsford out here, they've got they're making all these changes, and yet they still have this penchant for going for players familiar to Ten Hag, and he might not be the only former Ten Hag player who comes in. Of course, Matthias de Ligt is of interest as well. And Ten Hag even said in that AD interview last week or the other week, he said that, I wanted to sign de Ligt in 2022. So he wanted to sign de Ligt and he wanted to sign Frankie de Jong. And I find that strategy flawed. I mean, de Ligt, we've discussed, he's been in a very steady gradual decline over the past 5 years. He didn't even get a kick at the European Championship. With Mazroui, he's only been at Bayern Munich 2 years, and Bayern Munich already want to sell him. There used to be a time where United would think, no, we're not taking rejects from Bayern Munich or Real Madrid, and they have done that, and they seem willing to do that again. And I get that, of course, if you're looking for who are the available right backs, Mazroui playing for Bayern Munich, he's going to beep on the radar because Bayern Munich want to sell him. But he was on his way to West Ham, who actually finished below United last season. They finished quite a way below them as well, points wise. And you think, well, if as good a coach as Julian Lopetegui is, if West Ham are trying to sign this player, should United be trying to sign this player? And it was maybe a little bit similar a couple of years ago when Lyon were about to sign Tyrell Malacia, and then Ten Hag urged United to go for Malacia, and of course that's not worked out so far. He's missed 14 months of football. Maybe it will work out for him in the end, but he's already halfway through a 4-year contract, and he's up against it to really prolong his United career. Um, Probably beyond this season, because let's face it, he's not going to get sold because of his injury issues. But he's got a lot to do next season if or when he does get fit again. And so I think that, I mean, Ten Hag even said, there was that funny quote in the AD interview where he said, "Believe it or not, De Ligt wasn't my recommendation," almost as if he's aware that everyone's aware of the joke. Uli Hoeneß had that quote last week where the Bayern Munich, I don't know what his role is at Bayern anymore, but of course he's been a prominent figure at Bayern Munich for years. And he said, "Oh, yes, De Ligt could go to United. De Ligt is Dutch. The coach at United is Dutch." And of course, there was a former Bayern Munich striker in Joshua Zirkzee, who is also Dutch, who has recently signed for United. They've got 3 new Dutch coaches on the staff as well, and it's a curious way of going about it, given that given how unconvincingly United went through the process of keeping Ten Hag, and that they were planning to sack him until the FA Cup final. Then they still required 17 days to keep him. Then all they merely did was trigger the 1-year option in his contract to extend it until 2026. His coaching staff has changed quite markedly. There are now, including Ten Hag, there are effectively 5 managers in the dugout. Andreas Jorgensen, the new set piece coach, he was briefly manager of Lillestrøm in Norway. Okay, Steve McLaren gave up on being a manager some time ago, but he has got a hell of a lot of experience as a number one. Van Nistelrooy and Hake, their previous roles were as managers in the Eredivisie. So it's a curious dynamic on the coaching side of things. And I mean, I thought Lenny Yoro was. I mean, time will tell how it works out, but it felt like an Ineos-led signing, that in terms of his age and the eagerness with which United went about trying to sign him. But with Zirkzee and Mazroui, it's, if you didn't know John Murtough had left the club, you'd assume that he was still at the club, because those signings do feel more in keeping with the summers of 2022 and 2023.
Yeah, definitely. That's all for the first part. We'll be back after this break to look back at the Arsenal game. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. United losing 2-1 to Arsenal at the SoFi Stadium then. Samuel, you were there. I was watching bleary-eyed from here in the middle of the night, but I could tell it was a Manchester United game because players were going off injured. Not the best start to a pre-season tour when 2 players who were probably more than penciled in, were inked in to start the opening day of the season, are limping off in the first half of a game. And considering what happened last season, the amount of talk there's been about injuries, to see 2 players go off with what seemed like muscle injuries, not a great look and not a great start to the summer.
No, and it's 2 of the worst players who could have got injured as well. In that one of them's the number 9. Højlund had just scored as well. He did well with his goal. I thought there were times last season where he looked like the boy among men in duels, but he was very much the man against the boy in that one. And it was a goal that was needed. It was his first game of pre-season. It was his first goal as a starter for United, I think, since the Sheffield United game. So, he's off to a good start, and then 3 minutes later, he's down and out for the count. And United there's still radio silence from United on the extent of his injury and Yoro's injury. Normally, they put something out the day after the game to clarify what the problems are. But the fact that they've not done that, I think, tells its own story. That there's got to be an element of embarrassment there. That one tour game in and 2 players were off within the first 34 minutes. Yoro looked particularly crestfallen when he went off. Watching the game back yesterday, it was difficult to determine actually when he did that injury. I think with Højlund's, it might have been when he had a chance quite shortly after he scored, when he had a slight tangle with Ben White, and you wondered, did he tweak something there? I mean, he walked quite steadily through the mix zone, steadily, carefully, I suppose. I mean, he wasn't walking freely. of course, United, the common practice is the players will have had a scan the day after the game, and then they find that they know the extent of it, and then it's onto the recovery program. But United have still not indicated what the issue is with either player. And at the moment, it's just educated guesswork. I think there were some rumours flying around from on Twitter or some nonsense or other, but there's nothing concrete as it stands, and it's just not a good look when they've changed the physio. Of course, Jordan Rees come from Arsenal. Gary O'Driscoll became the head of medicine last year. They're doing other things. Been told about these, sleep windows, exposure to natural light, meal windows, all these. We know who's behind all this. It's Dave Railston, but I'm not completely. I think it's said to say I'm somewhat sceptical of it in terms of, is this going to make Manchester United better? This input from a guy whose wheelhouse is cycling. Yeah, ultimately and also for all the coaching changes they've made, an issue that is still glaring is that there is not a new fitness coach. And I'm not necessarily saying the incumbent should be replaced, but I do think they need someone else to come in. And it is common practice these days that when a manager moves clubs, he brings a fitness coach with him. And Ten Hag didn't do that 2 years ago. And given that Ineos have, let's face it, they have foisted some of the coaching changes upon him, it is peculiar that they've not looked at that and thought that's something that needs to be addressed after what happened last season. And look, the injury crises of last season, United were encountering massive injury issues long before Ten Hag's second season, dating back to Sir Alex Ferguson's time. So it is a historical issue, and it's an issue that they can't eradicate. And Ten Hag even told us at his pre-match press conference that it will happen. Like in terms of injuries, he said it's going to be the survival of the fittest, and unfortunately for him, it happened pretty imminently. So there were certain things that are out of United's control. The COVID season, the backlog of games, a World Cup in the middle of the season, not too much rest between seasons. There were Nations League games going on well into mid-June in June 2022. There's, of course, been the European Championship and the Copa America this summer as well. So it always feels like there's some football going on of some sort. And next year there's going to be FIFA intends to have this huge Club World Cup at the end of the season, which makes you wonder again. And I think we both saw Marcelo Bielsa's very eloquent diatribe about the quality of football and football not becoming as entertaining because of how commercialised it's become. And look, sometimes less is more. And I think that the change of format in European competitions is wrong. A Club World Cup at the end of the season in the summer with an expanded tournament feels wrong. A larger World Cup, I think, is daft when recent World Cups have been really good value with a 32 team format, and players are going to get injured more often if this keeps on happening, and it seems like the bureaucrats they certainly don't value the product as much as they claim to, because there's not enough thought given to what works best for the players. And the better the players are performing, the better the football. But if the best players are getting injured all the time, then that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ten Hag's used that survival of the fittest phrase twice now this pre-season. Pep Guardiola said on Saturday night after City's friendly in New York that someone is going to die. Basically, one of these players is going to die, and you can see why they're using such rhetoric, because it is ridiculous. And I mean, talking of one of United's injured players, it's difficult to take too much away from 13 minutes, but I mean, Højlund did actually look pretty bright for his first 13 minutes. Yoro made an early mistake, showed great recovery pace. And Højlund, I know he's saying to the 17-year-old, but he took his goal really well and seemed to be relishing wearing that number 9.
Yeah, he did. I mean, it was just a hoik up the pitch from Rashford, but Højlund must have been about 40 yards from goal, maybe a little less, but he did very well, just got his body in the way. He was authoritative in that duel. he was always winning that duel. It was bad goalkeeping. I mean, Hoyland, I think, starts to lose his balance slightly as he gets the shot off, and maybe that catches the keeper by surprise. But it was good centre forward play, and that's what made it such a pity that a few minutes later he was down out for the count, having just made a really, really good run as well to get on the end of that Wan-Bissaka chance. I mean, he possibly should have hit the target, but I think in terms of the run he made and the intent and being on the same page as a teammate, it was more encouraging centre forward play. So in those, as you say, in those 13 minutes, he did look sharp for someone who hadn't played since Denmark's round of 16 defeat to Germany in the Euros. And Joshua Zirkzee handily, he has been holidaying in Los Angeles, but United don't anticipate him joining up with the training squad at UCLA. United aren't, in fact, they're not really in LA for much longer. I think it's about 5 more days. They'll leave for South Carolina, I would imagine, on Friday, because of course they play Liverpool there on the Saturday, and then it's off home. So it doesn't feel that long a tour. There've been tours before where they've ended up playing 6 games in the United States, and they've got only 3 games this year, having also had 3 games last year, excluding that academy match against Wrexham. But in terms of the tour itself, I mean, that they are a lot happier being at one base. I think last year there were some issues in terms of how remote they were in New Jersey. The Houston leg did not go down well. I mean, it didn't go down well with us either. It's going from, we were based obviously in San Diego, and going to Houston and back is a 6-hour round trip, and it's going to a different time zone as well. So if it's not great for journalists, it's certainly not great for professional athletes. And some of the staff felt that was a tipping point. That game was due to be played in LA, but it was switched to Houston essentially because of money and money talks. And there was a concerted effort by the Houston World Cup delegation, I think, to try and get some momentum behind the NRG Stadium so that it would host some big games at the World Cup in 2026. But as far as I'm aware, I think it's only hosting a round of 16 games. So even schmoozing us, it didn't work too well.
We don't have that clout with FIFA after all. What a surprise!
No.
2 defeats in 3 in pre-season. Then, I mean, it doesn't normally matter. Obviously, Ten Hag was pretty unhappy with that Rosselberg performance. He seemed happier the other night despite the defeat to Arsenal. I mean, Arsenal had a much stronger squad to utilise than United did. I mean, who else? Did anyone else catch the eye in that game? I think Mason Mount is probably the one that you're looking at. I think Mount's maybe been United's best performer in pre-season. Played all 3 games, 3 halves now, and has looked pretty good in all of them. And obviously expectations to kind of kick on this season and find a way into the team first of all, I guess. But he seems to have been doing pretty well. And anyone else that kind of felt like a takeaway from that game for you?
I thought Onana was good. He obviously made a good save during the 90 minutes. And he made a good save from Kai Havertz during the pointless penalty shootout. But it was quite an entertaining shootout as well, given the kidology from Onana, and he was riling some of the Arsenal players, but he was still intensely competitive at that point, even though United had of course lost the game 2-1. But with those 2 players, they arrived last year, and yes, it's only friendly, but it does feel like the shirt is not weighing as heavily on them as it did pretty much all of last season. I mean, Mount's season was a write-off. Onana committed far too many mistakes that led to goals last season. He was particularly costly in the Champions League, but having spoken to him, I think it was after the Nottingham Forest Cup game in late February, and he said how it was difficult the first 6 months in terms of just settling into Manchester, life in Manchester, not so much what was going on the pitch, but it sounded like trying to settle in off the pitch, that was maybe having a bearing on his performances. But he's a really good personality. He's a really good guy as well. He's very personable, very likeable, and you can't help but hope that he does well. And I think what's one of the things that I like about him as well is that you go back to the cup final when he made that mistake from Jeremy Doku, and City of course scored. He was furious with himself. He doesn't hide. I think he takes accountability. He's more than happy to take responsibility. He's one of the senior players in that squad. He's 28. That's still a relatively youngish age for a goalkeeper. He's still got plenty of miles left in the tank, and I'd certainly expect him to have a steadier season than his first season. He was given the captaincy as well in the second half, as he was the only starter who stayed on for the second half. So that recognition as well, that should help him. But Mount has looked very dynamic. I think he's been quite creative. He fashioned a decent chance for Ahmad before United scored. I suppose the interesting thing there is that he's playing in the number 10 role, and Bruno Fernandes almost certainly will be available for the start of the season. So is Mount accommodated in the same 11, or does he keep that role, and does Fernandes move to the right? That's also an option, depending on how Ahmad gets on. I'm sure a lot of United fans would love to see Ahmad start the season, but there's every chance that if Mount has a good pre-season, which he has been so far, I think, and with Fernandes as well, there's every chance that it could be Mount behind the striker and Fernandes on the right.
Yeah, definitely. It gives Ten Hag options, and we'll see some of them next on Wednesday night for yourself in San Diego. Real Betis, early hours of Thursday morning over here. Are you looking forward to your jaunt to San Diego?
Well, we're now driving down rather than taking the train.
A road trip.
Yes, exactly, a road trip. I will not be driving. I've driven in LA before, but it's a different designated driver. So yes, as we both know, San Diego is a lovely part of America. Never mind California. So just the one night stay there, and then back relatively early the next morning, as there are a few things going on back at United's base. But so far so good. Can't complain whatsoever. But it does make it a hell of a lot easier for the players, for us being based in one place. I think last year United were in New Jersey, they were in San Diego for a while, but then they had a night in Houston, then they had a couple of nights in Las Vegas as well. So there was probably too much travelling. I mean, Christian Eriksen, we did an interview with him last week, and he said that the football went backwards last season, i.e. it wasn't prioritised. And the amount of times United have told us or stressed to us or have to reiterate to us that the football is the priority, and it's still something that's going on. So it tells you that it's not always been the priority, certainly in the last 10 years or so. But you hope under the new regimes certainly as well that it does. It does feel different. I think last season something just didn't feel quite right on that tour. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but with Mason Greenwood bubbling under the surface, I certainly don't think that helped. Clearly, there were issues in terms of the schedule. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever to start a tour in New Jersey on the East Coast and then end it on the West Coast, 8 hours behind. But this summer, of course, they've come straight out to LA, and on their way back, playing in South Carolina, that's a 5-hour time difference with the UK. So they're working their way back to the normal, back onto UK time. So far so good. As you said, they've lost 2 of their 3 friendlies so far, but I think in terms of the preparations, it's definitely better than it has been last season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, Samuel, and thank you for setting your alarm and getting up early. Enjoy your week.
Oh no, I was up at. I was awake at about 6:30 this morning, so there's still not jet lag as such, but sometimes it's just hitting the hay very quickly and waking up naturally.
Good stuff. Well, Samuel will be back later in the week with Steven to look back at the Real Betis game and look ahead to Liverpool. I will be on holiday on a sun lounger somewhere, but I'll be sure to tune in. Thank you for joining us. Do leave us a like and to subscribe to get the latest podcasts in your feeds. But for everything, for now, that's everything, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
No
You're off to Portugal next week.